The Romans did not just conquer Rome, they conquered an empire that stretched so far across the known world that at one edge, the sun scorched the sands of North Africa, while at the other, icy winds howled across Hadrian's Wall in Britain. Most people picture Romans lounging in togas under warm Mediterranean sunshine. But here is what nobody tells you. Many of their soldiers, engineers, and settlers lived in places where winter was not just cold, but lethal. Places where temperatures routinely plunged below freezing, sometimes dropping toward negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So here is the question that should haunt every modern architect. How did a civilization born under gentle Mediterranean winters manage to not just survive, but completely dominate frozen frontiers? How did they build forts, bathhouses, and living spaces that stayed warm without modern insulation, without radiators, without central heating as we know it? This is not myth. It is engineering, proven by archaeology, carved into stone, and buried beneath 2,000 years of history. A reminder that innovation did not start with electricity. Today, we build homes with smart thermostats, remote sensors, and voice-controlled climate systems. But the Romans kept warm in places where temperatures dropped far below freezing. Without any of that, it does not mean we have not made progress, but it does raise a question. Have we forgotten the kind of solutions that work when modern systems go silent? The answer lies in a Roman invention called the hypocaust, a system of radiant heating that pushed warm air beneath floors and through walls. One of the earliest examples of true central heating, it offered steady, controlled warmth long before wires, gas lines, or oil tanks existed. Hypocausts were not just for luxurious villas and steamy bathhouses. They were used in military outposts too, even in the frozen edges of the empire, keeping soldiers alive in climates that would turn an unheated space into a death trap overnight. But before we dig into exactly how this system worked, we need to understand the challenge these Romans faced. Take Hadrian's Wall. It stretches 73 miles across the brutal northern frontier of what is now England. When construction began in the year 122, 15,000 Roman soldiers were deployed to build this massive fortification. These men came from across the empire: Syrians, Spaniards, North Africans, men who had never experienced winter as the ancient Britons knew it. Yet they not only built this wall through 6 years of construction, they then stayed there. For nearly 3 centuries, soldiers lived in forts along this wall, enduring winters that regularly dropped below zero, with wind that could strip the flesh from your bones. And this was not an exception. Archaeological evidence from sites across Britain, Germania, and Gaul shows something remarkable. The Romans did not just huddle and suffer. They engineered comfortable, controlled indoor environments in some of the most hostile climates on Earth. They did this through brilliant architecture, materials that absorbed and held heat, strategic room placement to capture sunlight, and that revolutionary heating system hidden beneath their floors. Before we reveal exactly how they pulled this off, consider this. Today, we have insulation rated by R values, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems controlled by smartphones, vapor barriers, and foam insulation designed by computers. Our thermostats maintain temperature to within a single degree. And yet, when the power goes out in winter, modern homes become death traps in hours. All that technology becomes useless. We are left shivering in structures that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, watching our breath fog in our own living rooms. To understand what we have lost, we need to go back to where Roman engineering began. We need to understand the hypocaust. When we think of Roman life, we picture sunlit forums and sheltered Mediterranean afternoons. But that image is dangerously incomplete. By the 2nd century CE, the Roman world extended far beyond that balmy core. In places like Britannia, Germania, and the High Alps, winter was not a mild inconvenience. It was ruthless, bone-deep cold that could kill. Snow lay deep for weeks. Frost hardened earth into something harder than stone. Rivers froze solid enough to march armies across. Winds swept through valleys carrying cold that seeped into every crack in walls, every gap in clothing. In these landscapes, warmth was not luxury. It was survival. Roman forts, those stone strongholds on the empire's frozen edge, were built in exactly these climates. These were not temporary camps. Soldiers were stationed here for months, sometimes years. And here's what most people don't understand about frontier life. If your men are shivering in damp wool after a march through sleet, they don't just become uncomfortable. They become sick, vulnerable, ineffective. In a fort surrounded by hostile tribes, that vulnerability meant death. The materials available worked against them. Stone and mortar are brilliant for defense, but thermally terrible. Stone walls soak up cold and release it slowly into interior spaces. Thick, defensive walls mean protection from siege engines, yes, but also mean long, freezing nights in chambers that feel like ice cellars if heat isn't managed. Timber, while better at holding warmth, was scarce this far from forests. To meet this challenge, Romans had to think beyond simply lighting bigger fires. A large hearth in a room's center might feel warm if you stood beside it, but that heat rose straight to the ceiling, leaving floors bitterly cold. Fire in living quarters consumed precious wood rapidly and produced choking smoke. What the Romans needed was not just fire. They needed controlled, sustained, evenly distributed heat that didn't suffocate the people it protected. That need became the seed of a solution that would transform how they built across the empire. It was more than a stove or fireplace. It was a complete system. A built-in method turning walls, floors, and entire rooms into active partners in warmth, rather than passive containers of killing cold. And the name of that system was the Hypocaust. The heart of their heating technology was invisible to anyone standing in the room. It was the Hypocaust, an underfloor heating system that distributed warmth in a way that would feel familiar even in a modern home. The name comes from Greek words meaning heat from below. Imagine walking across a Roman hall on a frigid morning and feeling gentle warmth underfoot. Not just around a single hearth, but throughout the entire room. Builders started by raising the floor above ground level on a grid of small brick or stone pillars called pile stacks. These held the floor up about 2 feet, creating a continuous cavity beneath the entire room. At one end of the building stood the prefernium, a wood-burning furnace kept stoked by attendants. The fire generated hot air and smoke that did not simply escape into the atmosphere. Instead, those gases were channeled into that underfloor space. This cavity acted like a massive radiator. As hot air spread through the channels, it warmed the stone floor slabs above. That radiant heat rose into the room in a steady, even way. Romans did not stop there. They built hollow flue tiles called caliducts directly into the walls. These allowed hot air and smoke to continue upward through the wall structure, transferring warmth to the walls themselves before escaping through vents near the roof. This dual system meant entire rooms reached comfortable temperatures, not just isolated hotspots. Entire living spaces became warm. In large bathhouses, this system reached an impressive scale. The hottest rooms, such as the caldarium where people bathed in steaming water, were positioned closest to the praefurnium. Other rooms, like the tepidarium with moderate warmth, enjoyed milder heat, creating a controlled gradient of comfortable spaces. Running a hypocaust was labor-intensive and fuel-hungry. It required constant furnace attention and steady wood supplies. Because of that, this method was more common in public baths and wealthy villas than in every soldier's barracks. But in cold frontier forts where troops needed reliable heat to survive, adaptations were used effectively in communal halls or command rooms. What made the hypocaust remarkable was the sustained, radiant heat, long before electric or gas heating existed. It was not perfect, but it let Roman architecture conquer winter, not just endure it. If the hypocaust was the heart of Roman winter survival, architecture was the skeleton that supported it and made it work. And here is what most people completely miss. Roman forts were not just random clusters of stone buildings thrown together for defense. They were deliberately designed, thermally aware micro-cities. Every decision, from wall thickness to window placement to room orientation, played a role in keeping soldiers alive through frozen months. Many forts were rectangular and grid-based, enclosed within massive perimeter walls. But within those parameters, architects made dozens of choices that directly influenced whether heat was retained or lost. Start with orientation. In colder regions like northern Britain or central Gaul, Roman engineers placed critical buildings, command centers, bathhouses, and officer quarters with broad southern exposures. This captured maximum sunlight during short winter days when every bit of passive warmth mattered. Today, we call this passive solar design. Back then, it was just practical survival sense. Roman architects also understood thermal mass, even if they never used that term. They built with stone, brick, and concrete, materials that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly overnight. These materials did not insulate the way modern fiberglass or foam might, but they buffered indoor temperatures, softening the extremes. Roman concrete, made with volcanic ash called pozzolana, created walls that were incredibly durable, moisture-resistant, and helped prevent temperature swings that could make spaces uninhabitable. Then there is wall thickness. Many fort walls were several feet thick, especially in frontier positions. That sounds excessive until you realize it meant fewer drafts, greater structural stability, and more internal warmth retained once the hypocaust had done its work. The interior layout also supported heat conservation. In heated buildings, rooms were clustered around a central warm space. Outer rooms acted as thermal buffers, protecting the interior from cold air entering through doors or windows. In bathhouses, cold rooms were deliberately placed the farthest from the furnace, and hot rooms near it, reducing energy waste. Even windows placement mattered critically. Glass was expensive and rare, especially in provincial forts, so windows were typically small, placed high on walls, and sometimes covered with oiled cloth or thin translucent stone like mica. These let in light without sacrificing heat through large openings. In short, Roman buildings did not just contain heat, they collaborated with it. And that philosophy might be the most important thing we lost when we abandoned these principles for cheaper, faster construction. In theory, we should be light years ahead of the Romans. We have central heating systems that respond to a tap on a smartphone. We have synthetic materials, building codes, climate modeling, and heat pumps that can extract warmth from frozen air. So here is the question that should bother every homeowner. Why do so many modern homes, especially in colder climates, still leave their occupants bundled in blankets, layered in sweaters, dreading the next energy bill? The short answer is speed and cost, and catastrophically misplaced priorities. Many modern homes are built quickly because the goal is not to endure centuries. The goal is to meet housing demand fast and sell units faster. Timber-framed construction, drywall, and synthetic insulation can create warm interiors, but only if every single piece is installed perfectly. One missed seal around a window frame, one drafty electrical outlet, one poorly insulated cavity in the wall, and heat starts bleeding out. In colder climates, this loss compounds rapidly, hour by hour, dollar by dollar. Today, many homes rely on forced air systems, blowing warm air into rooms through ductwork. But this air cools almost immediately if the surrounding materials do not hold warmth. Drywall does not store heat. It is a surface, not a thermal battery. Thin walls shed warmth fast. There is also the question of orientation and design. How many suburban homes are positioned with sunlight in mind? How many apartments are designed to absorb passive solar warmth in winter? Rarely is this part of the plan. Real estate priorities focus on street views, square footage, or maximizing units per acre, not thermodynamics or energy efficiency. It is not that our technology is worse. It is that sometimes it assumes more than it delivers. And when things go wrong, when the grid fails or the furnace breaks, we find ourselves wishing our walls were made of something sturdier than hope and drywall. The Romans didn't know what an R value was. They didn't run energy audits, or worry about carbon footprints, or attend conferences on sustainable building. And yet, in many ways, their buildings were more energy efficient than ours. Not because of better materials, but because of better thinking. Heat is precious. That mindset shaped everything. Today, architects and engineers talk about thermal performance, passive heating, and resilience. These are modern terms for what the Romans simply called survival. And it's not just theory or nostalgia. In recent years, some sustainable builders and passive house designers have revisited ancient principles with surprising, sometimes shocking, success. Take earth-sheltered homes, for example. Houses built partially underground or with thick thermal mass on the outside are more temperature stable, cheaper to heat, quieter inside, and require less mechanical intervention. Sound familiar? Roman bathhouses were often dug partly into hillsides for exactly this reason. They understood that earth itself acts as insulation when used correctly. Then there's radiant floor heating, now marketed as a luxury feature in high-end homes. Functionally, it is a refined hypocaust, a system where warmth starts below, rising gently and evenly. No blowing air, no duct dust, no cold spots in corners, just comfort. Even urban design has something to learn from Roman forts. Forts were not scattered randomly across landscapes. They were tight-knit, walkable, dense, and structured to make services, including heating, more efficient. Contrast that with modern suburban sprawl, where detached homes bleed heat on every exposed side and require constant mechanical systems just to stay livable. None of this means we should go back to stoking wood fires under tile floors with heavy labor. But it does suggest that some of our smartest ideas are not new at all. They're simply forgotten, buried under decades of cheap energy and faster construction timelines. What the Romans teach us is not about copying their tools or recreating their exact methods. It is about copying their principles. Build for the long term, not the next sales quarter. Work with the environment, not against it. Respect the energy it takes to stay warm. And when you design a building, make sure every brick, every beam, every window plays a role in keeping the people inside alive and comfortable, not just aesthetically pleased. Because in the end, comfort is not just a thermostat setting or a monthly utility bill. It is the outcome of everything we build around us. And the Romans understood that in ways we are only beginning to remember. If you found this interesting, if you believe building smarter starts by looking back at what worked before we forgot, consider subscribing. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers so we can keep uncovering forgotten ideas that still have something important to say. It's a small click for you, but it helps us keep digging into history that matters. Not just for trivia, but for survival. Because the Romans didn't just build forts, they built knowledge. Knowledge about heat, about materials, about design that worked with nature instead of fighting it. And that knowledge is still buried in ruins across Europe, waiting for anyone willing to pay attention. We have better tools now, better materials, better understanding of physics and thermodynamics. But somewhere along the way, we stopped asking the right questions. We stopped asking how buildings could protect us when everything else fails. We started asking how quickly we could build them and how cheaply we could sell them. The Romans asked different questions, and their answers kept soldiers warm on frozen frontiers for 3 centuries. Maybe it's time we started asking those questions again.